Sandra Meeks set it down that way on purpose. I had learned this about her in 3 days. The chart placement was a communication. Flat and centered meant the handoff was routine. Slid across meant she was tired. Dropped from height meant she had decided something about you, and what she had decided was not in your favor. I did not flinch. I had been in rooms where things landing hard meant something different than a chart. And the recalibration between those rooms and this one was something I was still performing. 11 weeks into a life I was still learning how to occupy. They told me to quit. They told me I wasn't ready for a trauma floor, that I was too green, that my instincts were off, and my pace was wrong, and the patients deserved someone who actually knew what they were doing. They said this in ways that were sometimes direct and sometimes filed under professional development. But the message was the same, regardless of the packaging. Then, 3 MH6 Little Birds landed in the north parking lot of Harmon General Hospital, and 8 Night Stalker operators walked through the ambulance bay in the dark. And the one in front said Angel. And everything that had been said to me in 11 days of working this floor became, in the space of that one word, factually irrelevant. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Lena Vasquez. I am 38 years old. I have been a registered nurse for 4 months, and I have been a nurse in every way that actually matters for 8 years. I came to Harmon General in Clarksville, Tennessee, a hospital that serves a community built around Fort Campbell, which means a patient population that skews military, which means I had reasons for choosing this particular place that I did not share with human resources during the intake interview. I took the day rotation because day rotation was where the hardest cases came, and I had not spent 8 years developing a specific set of capabilities in order to spend the next 40 years applying them to the easier version of the work. The ER at Harmon General smelled like every ER I had ever been adjacent to. Institutional bleach underneath. Coffee somewhere past its useful life. The antiseptic cold of the pre-procedure bay. And underneath all of it, faint and permanent, the copper register of blood that no cleaning protocol fully erased. The fluorescent lights above the nurse's station ran their low abrasive hum, and the floor was linoleum, and the monitors were chiming in their erratic civilian rhythm, and to the staff who had worked here for years this was Tuesday. To me it was a waiting room with better lighting than the places I had actually waited, and I was very clear on the difference. Sandra Meeks was my preceptor. She had been a trauma nurse for 19 years, and she was good at the job in the way that a person who has done a thing for 19 years is good at it, completely, and within specific parameters, and with the particular impatience for people who did not already know what she knew that is the occupational hazard of competence that has stopped growing. She was not cruel. She was efficient. And efficiency, at a certain level, stops distinguishing between the things that should be slowed down and the things that should not. On day 1, she had watched me take a blood pressure and said nothing. On day 2, she had watched me position a patient for a line insertion and said, "That's not how we do it here." On day 3, 11 days ago, now, she had stopped me at the nurse's station in front of the morning crew and said, clearly enough for the room to hear, "I need to be honest with you, Vasquez. I don't think you're ready for this floor. Your instincts are off. The way you move, the way you assess. It's not trauma nursing. I don't know what program trained you, but I've been doing this for 19 years and I can tell in the first week. You should think seriously about requesting a transfer to a lower acuity unit before you hurt someone." The room had gone quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that everyone heard and no one is going to address. I had looked at Sandra Meeks for 1 full second. I had thought about the 8 years that had produced the instincts she was describing as wrong. I had thought about a darkness outside Coast in 2014 and what my hands had done in it. I had thought about the specific quality of silence that falls inside an MH6 little bird when the patient stops responding and the pilot is 4 minutes from the forward surgical team, and what you do in those 4 minutes is the entire distance between whether the person under your hands gets to have more minutes after that. I had thought about all of this, and I had said, "I hear you," and I had gone back to work. My name in the Army had been different. Not a different legal name, the same name, Lena Vasquez, but a different version of it, used differently. The men of 2nd Battalion, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, had called me Angel from my second deployment onward, a call sign that started as a radio designation and became something else. Not because I was gentle, because I showed up. Because when the aircraft went out and something happened and the call came in, Angel was the one on the aircraft who got there, got to work, and got people back. They called me Angel the way they called their best equipment by names, not sentimentally, but with the specific respect of people who depend on something absolutely and know it. I had been a flight medic attached to the 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers, for 8 years. I had flown out of Fort Campbell, which was 11 miles from where I was standing, and I had worked on MH6 Little Birds and MH60 Black Hawks and MH47 Chinooks in the dark, at low altitude, at speeds that made the darkness feel personal. And I had kept men alive on those aircraft in conditions that civilian emergency medicine could not have imagined, and had been slowly incorporating into its practice for the last 20 years. Because military medicine had developed them first. I had left the unit in 2023. I had taken the nursing certification I had been sitting on since 2015, and I had walked into the HR office at Harmon General Hospital, 11 miles from where I had spent 8 years, and I had not mentioned any of the 8 years. This was, I had decided, the correct approach. The correct approach had lasted 11 days before the MH6s landed. I had been working the floor for 6 hours when Dr. Paul Merritt, the senior attending on days, had stopped me in the corridor outside Bay 4. "Sandra tells me you've been second-guessing her assessment calls," he said. He said it the way people said things they had been asked to relay and found mildly inconvenient to relay, with the air of someone delivering a message from someone else's authority rather than his own, which was accurate but did not diminish its weight. "I offered an alternative observation," I said. "The patient in Bay 4 had signs of early compensatory shock that weren't in the chart notes. The patient in Bay 4 has been managed appropriately," Merritt said. "Sandra is your preceptor. Her assessments are the ones that go in the chart. If you have observations, you bring them to her first." I did bring them to her. Then her response is the response. He paused. "Lena, I'm going to be direct. Sandra has been here 19 years. You have been here 11 days. The appropriate posture for someone in your position is to learn, not to correct. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I understood exactly what he was saying. I had heard versions of it before, in contexts that were considerably higher stakes, and the answer in those contexts had always been the same. You absorb the instruction, you note the calculus of the situation, and you determine whether the cost of compliance is one you can afford. The patient in Bay 4 had early compensatory shock. The cost of compliance was not one I could afford. I went back to Bay 4. I updated my section of the chart notes with the observations I had made, in clinical language, specific and documented. I did this quietly, and I did it completely, and I did it knowing that it would be noted and that the noting would carry a cost. I paid the cost, because the alternative was not paying attention, and not paying attention was not something my hands knew how to do. My hands. They had been the subject of Sandra's most precise criticism, that they moved wrong, that they were too deliberate, too sequential. that I was performing assessments in a pattern that was not the floor's pattern. She was right that my hands moved in a different pattern. She was not right about what the pattern meant. Flight medicine develops a specific manual grammar. When you are working on a patient inside an MH6 Little Bird at 200 feet and 150 miles per hour in total darkness, with the airframe vibrating underneath you and the pilot doing things to the aircraft that make the floor move in unpredictable directions, you learn to work with both hands in a sequence that prioritizes the things that can kill the patient in the next 90 seconds over the things that can kill them in the next 5 minutes. You do not check things in the order a hospital protocol specifies. You check them in the order that the physics of dying demands. And you do it the same way every time. Because the same way every time is what survives the conditions. That was the grammar Sandra had observed and called wrong. It was not wrong. It was written in a different language. In a context she had no access to, in conditions that made this trauma bay look like the waiting room it was to me. I had been thinking about this, standing at the supply cart outside Bay 7 with a restocking checklist in my hand, and the particular internal quiet of a person who has decided to remain in a situation they could resolve by disclosing the thing they have decided not to disclose, when the floor moved. Not dramatically, not the way it had moved in helicopters, where the vibration was structural and omnidirectional and arrived in the chest before it arrived anywhere else. This was smaller. A resonance transmitted through concrete, climbing through the soles of my shoes, and I recognized it before I knew I was recognizing it. The way you recognize a language you grew up speaking in the sound of a stranger's voice 3 rooms away. MH6 Little Birds, small rotorcraft, fast, agile. The acoustic signature of a little bird is higher in pitch than any of the larger military helicopters. A rapid, tight interval blade sound like something moving urgently through the air, rather than something heavy moving through it. I had ridden in more little birds than I had fingers to count them on, and I knew that sound in my bones in a way that had nothing to do with training, and everything to do with the fact that it had been the sound that preceded the work I was built for. More than one. The frequency was staggered. 3 distinct sources, arriving in formation, slowing for an approach that was not going to use the helipad. I set the restocking checklist on the supply cart. Not here. You are Lena Vasquez, new nurse, 11 days, 2 formal concerns logged in your file, 1 preceptor who has told you to quit, and 1 attending who has backed her up. You made your choice when you walked into that HR office. You filled out the forms. You took the assignment. This is not. I pressed my back against the wall outside Bay 7, and I breathed, and I told myself all of this, and I listened to the sound climbing through the concrete, and I thought about Angel, who was a person I had agreed to set aside, and about what it had cost to agree to that, and about the specific arithmetic of staying small in a building 11 miles from where I had never been small. Something's landing in the north lot. The day shift tech, a young man named Troy, was at the window at the end of the corridor. Multiple. Those are not medevac birds. No, I said. They are not. The incoming priority code activated at the nurse's station, the military transport designation, the flag that civilian hospitals received rarely enough that most of the staff had never seen it before. Sandra Meeks was at the station. She looked at the board. She looked at the code. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they don't have a protocol for. "What does this mean?" she said. Not to me. To the room. "It means you want your trauma team assembled right now," I said. "And Dr. Merritt should be here." Sandra looked at me with an expression I had seen before. The expression of a person whose authority is being navigated around and who has not yet decided whether the navigation is appropriate. I'll decide when. The ambulance bay doors opened. They came through differently than any of the other arrivals I had known. Not in the heavy organized choreography of a large team, but in the tight, efficient movement of a small one. The specific economy of Night Stalker operators, who had learned to work in confined spaces because the aircraft they worked from were the smallest in the inventory. 4 of them with the stretcher. Compact and fast. 2 more flanking, closer together than the wider teams. The spatial discipline of people conditioned by years of working in an MH6's minimal footprint. Behind them, 2 more. At the back, the one in charge. He was mid-40s, lean, the kind of face that had been in rotor wash for a decade and had the lines to show it. He moved through the ambulance bay entrance the way you moved through a door when you had been trained to never stop in a doorway, directly, immediately, with the forward weight of someone who had been going somewhere for a long time and had arrived. His eyes catalogued the room in one pass. Exits and personnel, and the patient's route to the bay, and the order of that inventory was exactly the order I would have run it in. Merritt was already there. Gloving. What do we have? Single casualty. Class 3 hemorrhagic shock. He's been in the field for 40 minutes. 2 large bore IVs running saline. BP is 63/40 and dropping. He looked at Merritt with the specific flatness of someone who has summarized a situation correctly and is waiting for the correct response to it. He needs blood products, and he needs them on the right ratio, or the saline is going to kill him before the wound does. Merritt nodded. Get him in Bay 1. I'll order the transfusion. What ratio? I said. The word came out before I fully decided to say it. It came out in the voice I had not used in 11 days, the voice that was not discourteous and was not soft, the voice calibrated for a situation where something that needed to be said right now. Merritt looked at me. The man in charge looked at me. Something happened in his face when he looked at me. Not recognition yet, but the precursor to it. The slight adjustment of a man running a comparison between what he expected to find and what he was finding. 1 to 1 to 1, I said to Merritt. Packed red cells, fresh frozen plasma, platelets. Damage control resuscitation, not saline. The saline dilutes the clotting factors, and at the volume he needs, you'll make the coagulopathy worse. I paused. The 2 liters of saline he already has in him are working against the clot formation right now. He needs the blood product protocol. Merritt stared at me. It's the military trauma protocol that civilian trauma medicine adopted in 2012, I said. It works. I have used it. We need to move. The man in charge looked at Merritt. He said, very quietly, she's right. That was all. She's right. 3 words, delivered with the specific gravity of someone whose confirmation of a thing made the thing true in the room. Merritt hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds was longer than we had. I was already moving. I did not wait for the authorization. I went to Bay 1 and I assessed the patient. 24, unconscious, the gray-white pallor of hemorrhagic shock in its 3rd stage, pulse thready and fast. The IVs running at the rate that had been keeping him functional and slowly costing him the coagulation he needed to stop being in shock. And I called the blood bank directly, and I ordered the 111 protocol in the language that the blood bank understood, and I initiated the massive transfusion pathway because I had the clinical knowledge to do it. And the patient was 24 years old and had 4 minutes. My hands moved in the grammar they had always moved in. Sequential, fast, prioritized, for the next 90 seconds. Sandra Meeks was at the bay entrance. She was watching my hands. Her face had changed from the face it had been carrying for 11 days. The face of a person who had assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion, into the face of a person watching a different situation than the one they had assessed. The man in charge had not moved from the bay entrance. He was watching. And then he said the word. Angel. One word. Flat, certain. The sound of a frequency finding its channel after a long time on static. The room heard a word they did not know. I heard my name. The real one. The one that had been earned in the dark over Khost and Paktika in the Shamal Plain. The one that had belonged to me for 8 years before I walked into an HR office and agreed to be Lena Vasquez, new nurse, day rotation, learning the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody in the Harmon General ER knew what Angel meant. They were looking at each other, looking at the man who had said it. Looking at the bay entrance and the corridor and all of the places a person might be standing if a person knew what that word meant. I was the only one not looking. I was looking at my patient's blood pressure, which was beginning, slowly, with the specific reluctance of a body that has been asked to reverse a bad trend and is considering whether it has the resources to climb. The man took one step into the bay. He had found me the same way I had found casualties in darkness, not by looking for what should be there, but by looking for the thing that was already doing the work. He looked at me. I looked at him. And across 11 days of charts dropped from height, and instincts called wrong, and a preceptor who had told me to quit. Something I had folded very carefully into a shape small enough to bring into an HR office undetected, straightened back into what it had always been. Angel, he said. Confirmation, not a summons. I held his gaze for 1 second. Then I looked back at my patient, because my patient was the reason I was here, the reason I had always been here, the only reason that had ever counted. I know, I said. Give me 2 minutes. The blood pressure climbed. The coagulation pathway, now supported rather than diluted, began its work. At 90 seconds, the systolic crossed 80. At 2 minutes and 14 seconds, it crossed 90. And I stepped back from the stretcher and I stripped my gloves, and I looked at the monitor the way I had looked at monitors in Little Birds and Black Hawks and FOB surgical bays, with the specific attention of someone checking whether what they did was sufficient. And the monitor said, sufficient. I turned to face the room. The man in charge, Captain Marcus Webb, 2nd Battalion, 160th SOAR, Fort Campbell, 11 miles from where we were standing, looked at Merritt. Petty Officer First Class Lena Vasquez, he said. United States Army. Flight Medic, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, 2nd Battalion. 8 years. Paktika Province, 2013, Khost, 2014 and 2015. 47 personnel recovered on aircraft, survived 2 aircraft incidents, including a Little Bird rollover in Khost in 2014 that killed the pilot. His voice did not change register at that last detail. It did not need to. Army Commendation Medal with Valor. Air Medal with Valor device, twice, honorably separated 2023. She has been working this floor for 11 days. He paused. The protocol she just used, that you were about to override, is the protocol her unit helped develop. She has performed it 47 times. 47. Under conditions your trauma bay has never approximated. The room was completely still. Sandra Meeks was at the bay entrance. She had been standing there for the last 4 minutes watching my hands, and she was still standing there now. And she was very quiet, and her face had the specific expression of a person who is honest enough to understand when they have been wrong about something that mattered. Merritt said nothing. There was nothing adequate. Webb looked at me one final time. And then his right hand came up. And the 7 Night Stalker operators who had come through those doors, every one of them, his entire team, came to attention in the same breath. The sound of their kit shifting in the movement, a sound that did not belong in a hospital corridor. and that I had not heard directed at me since the last time I had stepped off a little bird at Fort Campbell and handed a casualty to the surgical team, and heard it without expecting it, the way you hear something you have not let yourself anticipate. 8 salutes. In a hospital 11 miles from Fort Campbell at 10:43 in the morning. I came to attention. I raised my hand. I returned it. The motion was exactly what it had always been. Clean, complete, present. Not the motion of someone who had been doing this for 11 days. The motion of someone who had been doing this, in one form or another, for 8 years, and who had simply been doing it in a different room. Merritt had his hands at his sides, and an expression that I had seen on other faces in other contexts. The face of a good physician who has received more information about a situation than he previously had access to, and is in the process of updating his model. He was a good physician. He would update correctly. Sandra Meeks looked at me for a long moment, and then she did something I had not expected. She gave me one small nod. Not apology. Acknowledgement. The nod of a person who has been in this work long enough to understand when they have encountered something real, even when they encountered it wrong. I lowered my hand. Webb looked at me. "We were looking for you," he said quietly. "We've got 3 guys who won't fly with anyone else on the bird." "I know," I said. "I've been here." He nodded. He turned back to his man in Bay 1, and the organized work of a team that trusted each other took over the details, and I stepped back into the corridor. I walked to the nurse's station. I picked up the chart for my next patient. I noted the blood pressure, the respiratory rate, the medication timing. I noted the exit to the north stairwell and the exit to the loading dock and the service door at the end of Bay Corridor automatically, without deciding to, the way I always did and would always do. I opened the chart. The work was here. It had always been here. I had been here for 11 days, and I had been doing it the whole time. In the grammar it had always been written in the language that the room had not yet had the vocabulary to read. At end of shift I signed the checkout form the way I signed every form. Name, date, time, signature. The same information I had written on debrief documents after missions. Different boxes. Same data. Same hand. Lena Vasquez. Present. Still here. Still whole. If Lena's story stayed with you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories of the ones who showed up and kept showing up, whether or not the room knew what it was looking at. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels.